I would like to welcome Peter Bru, who is, I probably will pronounce your name not in the Danish way. I say
Makes good sense.
But Peter is a director of Center for Journalism, isn't that correct? And a professor at Southern Denmark University, University of Southern Denmark. I've been following his work already quite a while because already I know his work from the predecessor of constructive journalism regarding civic or public journalism, topics I have also been studying. So I know his work from already there, and therefore I'm excited to see how these ideas then continue to grow in the present moment. I also know that Peter has been studying a history of journalism, and gatekeeping theory, roles of journalists. So these types of themes. But today we learn more about a fresh book that has been out since the summer.
Yeah, July.
Yeah. So really like a fresh take on about constructive journalism. One of the first books to wrap up what has been going on. So let us welcome Peter, and let you will share the screen with your presentation, right? Okay.
Sure.
Here we go. Thank you.
And thank you, Laura, for the invitation and the introduction as well. I should add that I've been following your work as well, as you no doubtly know. So yeah. Anyway, this is the book that was out in July, and it deals with it's been kind of a labor of love because constructive journalism and some of the principal underpinnings of constructive journalism is something that I have not only an interest in as a researcher, but also because I believe it has a potential for journalism as such. This book is written based on primarily reviewing a lot of the research that's been done over the past years into this field, also looking into journalism history, also talked to a number of practitioner, journalists, editors, and others, but mainly looking into all of the research projects that's been done in previous years. So that's the background of the book. And since we only have around 20 minutes for the presentations, I thought I might already now tell you what the key takeaways, at least as way as I see it. Of course, you can decide what is important for you, but I'll be introducing you to what I call the three major waves of constructive journalism. Laura already touched upon the second wave. We'll get back to that in a second. I'll also be talking about four ways in which I believe you can be constructive. I'll also try to introduce you to what I call the working definition of constructive journalism, since this is a field that is moving and developing quite rapidly. It's kind of difficult to halt progress and say, well, this is how you could define it. Nonetheless, I think it's important that we try to become more precise about what it is we're talking about when we're talking about constructive journalism. So I'll be touching upon that as well. And finally, I'll present you with three challenges, the way I see constructive journalism today, challenges that I think entails that we as researchers and practitioners work closer together. So this is the layout for what we'll be talking about today. Starting with the three waves of constructive journalism, I think it's important to mention that there are many other smaller waves, you might describe them as, that has also touched upon various aspects of what it means to be a constructive journalist, that is to do more than present problems in society. But there has been three major waves. That's the work I've presented in the first part of this book. That you see up here. One of these waves is from the 19th century, one of them is from the 20th century, and then we have the third wave where we talk about constructive journalism today. Each of them have been introduced with a number of different concepts. These are just some of them, but I thought I'd run through them quite quickly to give you an overview of some of the ways in which journalistic practitioners in the past have thought about various ways in which they could be active or constructive in various ways. So starting with the first wave, some of the key proponents of this was incidentally also some of the most famous editors and newspaper owners I believe we have in the world as such. One of these was Joseph Pulitzer, the other was William Randolph Hearst, both of whom became some of the world's most wealthy persons, and also helped instigate journalism as a profession or semi-profession in its own right. Before these two gentlemen and other newspaper editors and owners, as you know, a lot of the press was characterized by being a party press. You had religious groups, you had commercial interests, you had political parties that owned newspapers. But particularly Joseph Pulitzer wrote about the need for now having a new interest at hand, namely the public. And he wrote about public service as the supreme end for journalism. I'm sure many of you also know that he helped endow Columbia University so they could set up a graduate school of journalism so you could train better journalists. That was also on part of Joseph Pulitzer and his work. And he also set up the Pulitzer Prizes, not only to train the future generations of journalism at Columbia University, but also to set good examples for those who were already practicing. And what was perhaps forgotten about Joseph Pulitzer's work was that he was a staunch believer in what he called action journalism, journalism that acts, a journalism that not only produce problems and present them to the public, but also helps the public solve these problems, if they had to do with poverty, crime, and so forth. Rather than just simply telling his readers about them, he and his employees set out to actually work to solve these problems. He called it a number of different things, and so did William Randolph Hearst. If you don't know him beforehand, many of you have probably seen the movie Citizen Kane with Orson Welles. That was more or less of a direct portrayal of William Randolph Hearst. He made a ton of money because he was so successful as a newspaper owner. And he as well also believed in the fact that journalism at times should definitely present problems, but they should also do something else. And he wrote, action, that is the distinguishing mark of the new journalism. The journalism that acts represents the final stage in the evolution of the modern newspaper. He truly believed that the fact that journalists should be a constructive force, as he wrote, was the way in which journalism should develop over time. And both of whom were very successful in their endeavor, as you could tell from the richness of and the wealth that they amassed over time. They were not alone at the European continent. In UK, you had people like Lord Northcliffe, also known as Alfred Harmsworth, and you had a person like William T. Stead. There were also successful newspaper owners and editors. Stead is perhaps most famous for this quote: "Newspapers hardly less than a government is guardian of the people's right. We need a government by journalism." He actually believed that journalism, journalists, and newspapers were better suited for creating a good welfare society instead of having a politician deciding what was supposed to be done. He believed that newspapers could be better at gathering people, getting them into communication, and coordinating different types of action. And he also believed that newspapers should be active, they should be constructive in helping society move forward, not only by presenting problems, but also pointing to various types of potential, that is, things that's going well or might go well in the future. In Denmark, as some of you might know, one of the most famous editors we had was Henrik Cavling. The most famous prize we have in Denmark, the Cavling Prize, awarded annually, is given in his name. And he was also really inspired by the action journalism and the journalism that acts. And he wrote in 1909, "Journalism has placed its banner on both poles of the globe, and one might think that there were no new land for it to win. But action journalism opens new and unlimited territories." And in Denmark, Henrik Cavling worked to fight poverty. Childcare support was something he campaigned for. He believed that sickness was something that the newspapers should help solve. And no matter what the problem was, he and his employees were working to set things straight. They also pointed to problems in society, but at times they also worked out of this constructive belief that journalism should do more than simply present problems. We might get back to that at a later point, but things happened in the 20th century, and for various reasons, the constructive journalism from the first wave more or less died out. Even some of the most iconic figures we have in journalism were actually a proponent of this. But then in the late 20th century, something resurfaced again. Laura touched upon that. It was called, under various names, public journalism, civic journalism. And some of the key proponents are presented here. One of them was J. Rosen, who set up a program with fellows at the New York University. He wrote, public journalism should include and address people as citizens, potential participants in public affairs, rather than victims or spectators, and they should help society act upon rather than just learn about its problems. He was working closely together with this gentleman on the right-hand side, at least on my screen, Davis Bos-Merritt, who was an editor at Wichita Eagle in Kansas, who wrote, and this is a key statement, I think, because it touches upon the fact that some of these supporters and proponents and promoters of constructive journalism truly believe that this can also be objective or be considered a type of objective journalism. And the way Davis Bos-Merritt described this was in this way: journalists should be fair-minded participants who are neutral on specifics, but move far enough beyond attachments to care about whether resolution occurs. And these two and others working with the public journalism, civic journalism tradition went to great efforts to describe how you can actually be active or constructive and still being objective. And in a sense, they actually evolved or put out discussions about how you can be active and constructive further than what happened in the first wave, where at times Pulitzer and Hearst had difficulties explaining how you could actually go about being objective while still doing action journalism or working as journalism, as government, and so forth. Then, at least in Denmark and a number of other countries, public journalism, civic journalism more or less vanished, at least as concept. Some of the practices might have continued, but the concept as such more or less died out. And for some years, there were not too much news about this. And then we had constructive journalism developing. We might also discuss this at a later point. Particularly in Denmark, some editors and people with an interest in the media and engagement there sought to bring this forward once again. One of them is Ulrik Hågerup, who is now running the Constructive Institute in Aarhus University. Kind of resembles what J. Rosen did at New York University with the fellowship programs. They have various projects, and it's a way to try to bring the discussion forward. These persons are, of course, very different. J. Rosen was a professor doing research, and Ulrik Hågerup was former news director in the Danish broadcast company. Ulrik has written, constructive journalists should focus on the future, not only looking to the past, what have happened in the past, but looking to the future by openly asking, how can we do better the next time? And thereby they contribute to the public debate being oriented towards solution and the future. This future focus and this focus on solutions, extremely important also in constructive journalism. And some of the wording here actually resembles that was made forward in the public journalism area, the second wave, and also the first wave with Randolph Hearst and others. Another key proponent here, and Katrine, you actually helped, I believe, set up this network, or sometimes part of it. She might even be present today. I can't really tell from the screen, but Katrine has written, constructive journalism investigates opportunities, looks at dilemmas from all sides, and indicate remedies. It does not ignore the problems, and it does not trivialize them. Instead, it focuses on how these problems can be solved. Once again, solving problems, looking to the future, not only pointing to problems, but also solution. These are some of the keywords of the constructive journalism that have evolved over time. Each of these movements, the three waves, have been rather impressive when they have grown in time, and they have become some of the best organized movement in the history of journalism, several researchers point to, and that's quite impressive. But it's also noteworthy that at least the previous two waves have, for various reasons, died out. And one of my main reasons for writing this book is not having us repeat the same things over and over again. I would rather prefer that we do not get a fourth or fifth or seventh wave of constructive journalism, but that we actually learn from the previous waves. What can we bring forward? What should we perhaps not bring forward into the future? But let's learn from the past. This has been one of the key aspirations for myself. So a few things history teaches us. I'll try to sum up here. There's been these three major waves. We could discuss other movements as well, but these three major waves where you're doing more than simply presenting problem, and as you've been told here, promoted by some of the past most iconic figures. Important to note, every time, at least so far, criticism of traditional journalism has not been equally matched by clear definition and long-lasting clarity. That's a key issue, I believe. Oftentimes with these three movements, they have been, or the three waves, they've been really good at addressing the problems with traditional journalism, but they have not been as effectful in terms of institutionalizing new ways of working. And for that reason, more or less, the waves have died out. Historically, the result has been a multitude of concepts, some by supporters, other by opponents. At least with the first wave, many of us know this today as the yellow journalism. This is a derogatory term. It was named by some of the adversaries of the active journalism in the first wave, but they really won. So they, for many, many years, they have been the ones who have tried to explain to the rest of us how we should go about thinking about the work of Joseph Pulitzer or William Randolph Hearst. And it's kind of a shame. So I've tried to dust off history by looking at this first wave and telling and hopefully showing that we can use some of it. It's actually inspirational for a number of us. Some of you might also know that the public journalism there was the same ambiguity about what it actually was. How could you define it? So whenever something bad happened, at least in the US, critics would say, well, this is a clear example of public journalism, even though it seldom was. But since there were no clear definition, it was way too easy for people who were critical of civic journalism and public journalism to denounce it and say, well, this is just another example of that. So I've tried to look into the history, and I've also tried to look into the history to be clear about how we might differentiate about the various ways in which one can be constructive. The book presents you with this dichotomy that is actually a continuum about how passive or active a journalist should be. Passive here could entail that you're simply just mirroring the things that take place in society. Now I'm kind of less paraphrasing the title of Katrine Gyldensted's book. It's called From Mirrors to Movers. And much of traditional journalism will tell us that we should be passive in the sense that we simply mirror what takes place. But constructive journalism is more active in various ways when it comes to different types of ways in which you might do more than simply present problems as such. And I've tried to delineate them along the lines of this continuum. And this is something I could talk about for hours, but let me just briefly mention that I talk about 4 different degrees of being active or constructive. The first of these is the fact that some journalists and editors will consider themselves to be constructive while they point to problems. Both Ulrik Hågerup and Katrine Gyldensted explain in their various books that this is their starting point. When they started out as journalists and editors, they also wanted to move the world in various ways, but they wanted to do this by pointing to problems and then leaving it to others to decide what to do about them, if do anything at all. What they found out, and that was the reason why they started working with constructive journalism, was that that was seldom good enough. Indeed, at times that might even pose a problem in itself when you're only posing or presenting problems, because people get afraid, they avoid the news and so forth. So what they did is the second degree of being constructive. They believe in the point that you should actually also present potential. Potential, that could be things that are already going well, or that might be things that could go well in the future. Thing that offers an inspirational spark for people. So that is the second degree. You're not only, as Ulrik would say it, you're not only looking at the world with one eye, only looking at the problems, you're also looking at the world with the other eyes, also looking at what actually works. And at best, you use both your eyes to present both problems and potential. But then there are others who go a step further. They not only present potential, but they also work to make these solution or these potential actually to have an effect. So they not only believing in the role of journalism to present things that go well, also they believe that you should actually work more actively to bring change about. And at times, and this is the fourth degree that I try to exemplify in the book, you also have some constructive journalists who actually believe they themselves should take part in the solution. They themselves should help solve problems with climate, with health issues, or other kinds of problems where they, as journalists, use their own time or their spare time to help citizens become, or kids become better readers, to help with traffic problems and thoughts like this. And I try to place these on a continuum, and I try to exemplify them in the book. The way they differ from each other is that the two first, presenting problems or presenting potential, this is where you leave responsibility to act to people outside of the newsroom. For people, and I believe when I talk to Ulrich, he would say, well, this is as far as he would go on this continuum. He would stay away from promoting solutions, partaking in solution. He believed constructive journalism is more an issue of presenting problems, but also presenting potentials, but then to stop there. But you can talk to other constructive journalists and other promoters and proponents of constructive journalism who believes that at least at times it is also okay to take on the responsibility oneself as a journalist or an editor and to actually help solve problems in various ways, not only perhaps by promoting them, but also by actively taking part in the solution. For some journalists and some editors, as the book shows, this would be fall outside of the realm of objectivity. And I briefly, way too briefly, I think this is something that in future works I'll be working on, would like to spend a lot more time on. When are you actually objective and how far can you go when you are constructive journalism? But the book briefly touches upon various types of objectivity, and historically we might have a quite conservative view about how you can only present problems, and when you start presenting potential, you are no longer objective. Hopefully, that's one of the things that the constructive journalism movement, the third wave, have helped realize for many of us, that it can also be considered to be objective when you also present potential, not only present problems as such. But I think there might be a case even for also discussing if you cannot be a objective journalist and still also promoting solutions and perhaps even partaking in solutions. We might get to discuss this today. And then some of the work that's done also by other researchers, I should mention, I have a couple of colleagues, Uni From from Aarhus University and Nete Nørgaard Christensen from the University of Copenhagen. They have shown that various types of construction have been found for centuries within some topics. So as soft journalism, where we talk about service journalism, where you have segments about how people might help their garden become a more beautiful place, or how they might help the social welfare of their kids and stuff like that. It's not been a problem to be constructive or being active when it comes to those topics, whereas other topics have been more controversial. And today you find many places that while you still have opponents in terms of not wanting to move into constructive journalism, there are some issues, there are some topics that are considered okay to do constructive journalism with, because these issues are considered so important that it's actually okay. And some of the key issues I often find is, and I know some of you present today also are working at this, Gert, I'm looking at you right now. So within climate journalism, it's been, there's a lot of support for also being active and constructive when it comes to this, and within health issues and stuff like that. So this dichotomy and this continuum should also be viewed on the basis of various types of issues, where some issues enables you to go further out of this continuum to the right hand, whereas other issues might be more controversial, and then you have to move to the left hand side of it. Yes.
I have gotten the role of taking time. I'm
yeah.
sorry.
Yeah. So I'm just about to pick.
It's really interesting, but if we need to have questions and so on.
Yeah. So I'll end here with the definition of constructive journalism. This is a working definition, and I think there are two things you need to center on. The way I've tried to define it here is taking into account the various views on which some people think about constructive journalism. So one key aspect here is, of course, not only presenting problems, but also looking at potential. And another aspect is, as to some journalists, some editors, that will be an end in itself. For others, presenting potential is a means to engage in other ends. And then we might get back to this. These are the important takeaways, and three things that I myself believe is very important in the future. There's this need for conceptual clarification. I believe the work I've done is a step in this direction, by far not far enough, but that's more belief there. I think we also need to be stronger, not only criticizing traditional journalism within the constructive journalism movement, but also should point to particular practices. So it's a lot easier to teach. The teachers, the lecturers I have at the university where I work often have a hard time teaching constructive journalism, because what are the tools, what are the methods, what are the techniques? And finally, a call for us researchers. We simply need more research into the effects of constructive journalism. We know way too little about this still, and there are conflicting results. So a lot more research is needed. And I guess this is where all researchers always end. More research is needed. But let me stop with that. And sorry for taking too long. I get engaged with this important case. So, yeah.